when I have a class during the legislative session, one of the things I really like to do is go over to the legislature and pick up a stack of bills, which anybody can do in the bill room with the state legislature, come back into the classroom, distribute 2 or 3 to each student, and say, now your responsibility is to read the bills, or at least enough of them so you know what's happening, and then relate it to a principle. This piece of legislation to a principle of good government. And stand up and give a report on the bills, relate it to a principle, and say whether the bill violates or supports a particular principle of liberty. Now, as a teacher, there's few things that really get to a teacher, but when you see 12th grade high school students standing up and evaluating current legislation, real legislation, in terms of principles, well, that's something that is so thrilling. That's the reward of a teacher. You know that they've made it that far. And that will happen to you. And I have so many parents who say, you know, we have such good discussions at night because of what my child is learning in your class. They know the principles. One mother called me a while back and says, we can't even watch the television news anymore without my daughter saying, oh, let me tell you about that. That's great. Or they shouldn't be doing that. That's a wrong principle of government. Anyway, I recommend these to you. Now, if you will just to conclude here, on page 5, let me just tell you what George Washington's reaction was. You remember after the Revolutionary War, Washington resigned his commission, went back to Mount Vernon, and it was about 4 years after the Treaty of Paris was signed before the Constitutional Convention took place. And during that 4 years, it was rough. There were big problems. And Washington made a comment, even during the convention. He says, I'm not sure this thing's going to succeed. Maybe I'm wasting my time here. There was so much arguing and so much bickering. And at the bottom of page 5, Washington, after 2 years of the Constitution being in effect, in other words, he had been president for 2 years, he made this statement, bottom of page 5. He says, the United States enjoy a scene of prosperity and tranquility under the new government that could hardly have been hoped for before they had the convention. The next day he wrote, tranquility reigns among the people, with that disposition toward the general government which is likely to preserve it. Our public credit stands on that high ground which 3 years ago, this is before the government was organized under the new Constitution, would have been 3 years ago, it would have been considered as a species of madness to have foretold. What's he saying there? He's saying, if anybody would have told me just 3 years ago that we could have had such tranquility and peace in just a short period of time under the Constitution, I wouldn't have believed him. I would have thought him mad. But he says it happened almost miraculously. Don't you get that from what he's saying? It happened. And I kind of liken that to today, folks. Maybe we, if we were to meet 3 years from today, maybe we could, if we're successful at this, could say the same thing. If anybody would have told us 3 years ago, when we were sitting in class learning these principles, that it would solve so many problems so quickly, we would have probably laughed them out. It would have just sounded impossible. But if we're successful at having Americans restore these great principles of freedom and liberty, we can say with Washington, tranquility, peace reigns, and our problems are being solved. That's what these principles of liberty can do once again for America as they did originally 200 years ago. When we discuss our next lesson, we will take up the subject of political spectrums, and we'll talk about ruler's law and people's law.